So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the John Rylands Library. My name is Stefania Silvestri, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher of the Center for Jewish Studies here at the University of Manchester. Just a brief notice before we start. We are filming. You should have been told downstairs. If anybody doesn't want to be filmed, please let us know. We'll make sure that you're not included. You shouldn't be, but just so you know, there are cameras everywhere. And the second thing is inside those leaflets that you should have a feedback form. We would really appreciate if you would be willing to fill it out and leave it at the end. Or alternatively, there will be my colleagues in purple clothes downstairs with iPads, like Caroline, with iPads, and you can fill the feedback on the iPad. So I'll just go tell you briefly what will happen tonight. As you have understood, I'll give a small talk about specifically about the project that I'm working on, which is called the 50 Jewish Objects. That is the reason why we're here. We'll have afterwards a collection encounter, meaning you will be able to see original manuscripts just at the back there with the curator, Elizabeth Gao. And finally, you'll have the choir performance. Throughout my talk, I will also refer to the manuscripts that you will see later, but you have the handouts, so you can at least see some pictures in the meantime, so you know what I'm talking about. This evening is the first of a series of events that will happen in the next 2 years, approximately 2 years, as part of the 50 Jewish Objects project. It's a project that will last 3 years, started already 1 year ago in October 2018, and it's part of a bigger funding that the Center for Jewish Studies received to enhance and promote Jewish studies in the north of the UK and Ireland. The aims of the project is to research Jewish heritage kept in the north of the UK and Ireland in the institutions that are part of the network, together with Manchester, of Jewish Studies, and to study objects produced by and for Jewish communities throughout the world. The nature of the institutions that I'm assessing, which are mostly libraries, means that most of the objects, not exclusively, but most of the objects are actually books or items that have some kind of written form on them. And Jewish studies until now, not exclusively, but mostly, has been a field very logocentric, meaning that it's been a field where the main interest is the study of text for what they tell us about the environment, the intellectual environment in which the author lived, for example, or whether we can identify a continuum with previous or successive Jewish literature. But the aim of the 50 Jewish Object Project is actually to shift the focus of mostly text-based study to the study of objects in their materiality, form, function, and meaning. Examples of this type of study using objects here at the Rylands is what I will give you today. So I will give you a few examples using objects that are held here. So as you will gather while I talk, the focus on material aspects of these objects can highlight incredible characteristics of both the Jewish communities in which the objects were produced, but also the connections and relations with the surrounding majoritarian culture in which Jewish communities were living. So to show this, I've picked four specific objects that are produced or were produced in different times and different places throughout the world. The first one, and if you open your handout, you will see the first one. It's Hebrew manuscript 59, and it's actually the object that brought us here today. It's a musical manuscript, so meaning a manuscript with music notation and lyrics in Hebrew. Ruti Worrall, the director of the choir that you will hear in a bit, throughout the performance, will give some details about the actual content of the manuscript and about the songs. I can't deal with that, I'm sorry. And she will give some insight on the author, Yaakov Bachman, who was a cantor in late 19th century Odessa, so in Russia. But what interests me is to think about why the manuscript is here and why the manuscript was written. The interesting thing is that the manuscript was written in the UK, specifically in Pontypridd in Wales in 1917. There are not many details in the manuscript itself as to the reason the manuscript was produced. So we have to do a bit of historical research and find out something else. What is called Jewish secondary migration to UK and Ireland is Jewish migration at the beginning of the 20th century, so between 1900 and 1930. And this secondary migration is particularly prominent from Russia and established itself especially in Wales. 1917, the year that the manuscript was produced, is actually the year in which the Jewish community of Wales reached its peak of 5,000 members. So, Shirat Yaakov, which is the title of the manuscript, of the text of the manuscript, was published shortly after the death of the author, so in 1905, and it was published in Russia, which indicates that the music was already present in printed form. So having a book in handwritten form in Wales just a few years afterwards is quite peculiar. And we don't have details about the scribe or the possible patron of the manuscript, but it is quite clear that the scribe must have had a printed version of the book and to use as a model to actually copy the music and the lyrics, and that the patron wanted a magnificent example of something that he might have considered his original heritage, his Jewish Russian heritage. And you will see later why I talk about a magnificent example. It's quite big, it's quite nice. The second item that I would like to take into consideration is on your third page. It's called the Sefer Mitzvot Katan of Isaac of Corbeil. It's an illuminated manuscript, which means that it's a manuscript with extensive decoration in various colors, including gold. And we don't know exactly details of the production. We can gather them from various evidence because of the illumination, especially of the decoration. The text itself, which in English is also called the Gates of Exile, is or the Small Books of Commandments, is a 13th century collection of laws, of Jewish laws, which sort of define practical life, Jewish practical life. This specific manuscript also, it includes glosses from one of the scholars of the author's pupils. And in the manuscript itself, you can identify the different type of text, either be the main text, which is in larger characters, or the glosses, so the smaller additions in smaller text. So, as I said, the place and date of production are not evident on the manuscript. There are indications of it. There is a sort of like template for a legal document that indicates a date, which is 1346. 1346, yes. And that would indicate that the production must have been around that date. The decoration itself leads us to believe that the manuscript was produced in a very specific area in Europe, in contemporary Europe, which is basically Low Countries, the Duchy of Brabant. And this is because there are manuscripts, both Jewish manuscripts and non-Jewish manuscripts, that have a very similar decoration to this one. So, for example, there are flower motifs in the frontispiece, and monkeys and marginal grotesques, for example. So these can be found in other contemporary manuscripts. The third item, and you can turn it, it's a small fragment, And the fragment includes what is known as the Mishneh Torah, which is also known in English as the Code of the Law and Ethics, which is a codified collection of Jewish religious law used until still today. The author of the Mishneh Torah is called Maimonides, and he was one of the most prolific and influential Jewish scholars of the Middle Ages. He was active in Spain, Morocco, and Egypt as a rabbi, scribe, physician, scholar, and author. He wrote extensively on any subject you can think about. He wrote mostly in Arabic, except for, well, not except, but this book, the Mishneh Torah, is the most famous one that he wrote in Hebrew, because his audience was a Jewish audience, and it had to be used throughout Jewish diaspora, so he was not able to use Arabic for example, Jewish communities in Europe that wouldn't understand Arabic. What is interesting about this fragment is that it comes from a specific collection, or a specific place, actually, which is called the Cairo Geniza. The Cairo Geniza is a sort of warehouse where texts in Hebrew that contain the name of God have to be discarded when they are out of use. So a text that contains the name of God cannot be destroyed. It has to be put in a sort of warehouse, and later, after a certain amount of time, it has to be buried. What is interesting about the Cairo Geniza is that in Cairo, in the old city of Cairo, in Al-Fustat, there was a Geniza, and the texts were never discarded, were never buried. So they were there for years and years and years. So when scholars, British scholars, arrived in the 20th century, in the 19th century, they discovered a collection of texts, an incredible collection of texts that you can't find anywhere else. Most of these texts were in fragmentary form, and they were basically all brought to Europe or the United States. The biggest collection is in Cambridge, because the biggest scholar that discovered the collection is Schechter. So he was a scholar in Cambridge, and he went to Cairo and brought almost everything back. Other collections are at the Jewish Theological Seminary in the US, and in Oxford, and here in Manchester. So we have a small collection, small, 15,000 fragments, so it's not very small. What is interesting about this specific fragment, that is called the butterfly fragment because of its shape, it's actually two fragments conjoined. So they found them separated, and you can see from the different colors, they found them separated and they put them together. They realized that they were from the same page. Is that it's an autograph, meaning that it's the hand of Maimonides, the hand of the author. So we know that the fragment must, even though we don't have date, we know that it must have been produced before he actually finished his entire collection, his entire Mishneh Torah, which was 1180. So it has to be before that date, sometime before that date. What is interesting about this specific fragment is the amount of correction and annotations that you can see, which means that Maimonides must have reworked extensively on his text before arriving to his final form. And finally, the last object is an interesting one. It's a very modern one. It was produced this year. So throughout the project, we are collaborating with artists of varied background, and we asked them to come and see the collections here at the John Rylands Library and take inspiration from them and produce modern art piece. They can be of any kind. The first artist that we commissioned is called Jacqueline Nichols, and you have the details there. She's a London-based artist, and she produced this piece, which she called Handle with Care. She took inspiration from various items throughout the collection, in particular from Maimonides fragments. That's why I put them together. And you will probably see, when you see the original object, why. You will see some physical characteristics that will remind you of both. You will find the connection yourself. What is important to think about is that items produced now can shed light on the items from the past. You have to consider that even though these objects are held here, and mostly only researchers like me will access them, they are still alive, and having artists produced modern pieces, it's actually what brings them alive again. So I think I would like you now to go and have a look to the original objects. We have a bit of time, so you don't have to rush. It's just at the back there. I can lead you there. But please be back to your seat around 6:30, just a bit before 6:30, so then the choir can start their performance. Okay, thank you.